So, Dr. Rachel Schambow, the researcher at CAFS, she's going to talk about impacts of African swine fever on public and environmental health, examples from the Philippines. Rachel, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Valeria. And just to confirm, you can hear me clearly, correct? Okay, perfect. All right, so Valeria invited me here to talk a bit more about some of our work that we've done, trying to assess some of the public health and environmental health impacts of African swine fever. And so I'm going to be using examples from some of our work in the Philippines. All right, and so I see we had some other CAF speakers, so I don't have to emphasize this slide too much, but like Valeria said, I also work at the University of Minnesota Center for Animal Health and Food Safety. I particularly want to recognize on the slide Dr. Jiawei Xu, who I think will be talking after me. So he made a couple of these slides, so I want to give him credit, and also want to highlight some of the background work that he's been doing for ASF in the Philippines. And he might be talking more about this shortly. But this has really helped us to be able to kind of go down this avenue of looking at more of the public health impacts and not just the animal health or economic impacts. So I wasn't sure what the background would be of the group that we will have here today, but I want to include a slide on African swine fever just in case. So as some of you probably know, many of you probably know, African swine fever is a viral hemorrhagic disease of swine. It's caused by this double-stranded DNA arbovirus called the ASF virus. And this is a pretty lethal disease. It can cause up to 100% mortality in affected pigs. And because of that, it is recognized by the World Organization for Animal Health, or WOA, as a reportable disease. So as countries get this disease, they typically implement pretty strict control measures to try to get rid of it. And it only affects pigs, so it affects domestic pigs, wild boar, and some wild species as well. But it's that threat to our domestic pigs that we are very concerned about. So the Philippines has had ASF since 2019, and since the entry of the disease into the country, they applied control measures, but over the past 4 to 5 years, it's become endemic in many regions. So you can see it's in pretty much the majority of the country. On the right-hand side, there's a graph kind of giving you a update as to some of the outbreaks. This one's a little bit older now, but just to give you the idea that this outbreak has been going on for a really long time and affecting really the majority of the country. And also the swine industry in the Philippines is mainly backyard. So it's about 70% backyard farmers and about 30% commercial. So it's really a majority of these small farmers that have, like a handful of pigs. That's kind of what the background is. And the country has been implementing control measures. So they have had this National ASF Prevention and Control Program. I won't go into detail on this, but just more to let you know that there have been, a response by the government. They really have been trying to eradicate the disease. Mainly they respond through trying to identify infected herds and then depopulate them. And I believe they don't have indemnity. So you can kind of see where that might be setting up here for some potential effects to humans, to the social side of things, right? If you're coming in with an emergency response to this type of disease. So that, kind of our work with ASF over the years, and also with other foreign animal transboundary diseases that you have this very severe effect, has really led us to wonder, what are these public health impacts of these diseases, and how can we kind of holistically manage and mitigate them? And so I want to start off with some definitions. So first off, I just want to make it extra super clear, ASF is not a food safety concern, and the ASF virus does not infect humans. However, the ability of a virus or a pathogen to infect is kind of a narrow view of health when you think about it. So this is from the World Health Organization, but health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmary. And when we look at breaking this down into other parts of health, we're considering things like your physical health. So that one's, I think, a little bit more straightforward and easy to understand, right? That's just the functioning of your body. Is your body functioning well and in a healthy manner? But then there's also things like food security. That's the state of having access to a sufficient quantity of affordable and nutritious food. Then we have your mental health and well-being. and that contains aspects of your emotional, psychological, and social well-being. And social well-being itself is, you know, kind of the health of your relationships with other people and how we interact with others. And so we wanted to explore, how does this emergency response to ASF and, you know, having the disease in your country, how does that affect these various aspects of our health and well-being? So I first want to start out with this slide, just looking a bit at food security. So you have the time in the x-axis. This is going from 2019 through 2023, and then the price of pork. And so you can see that over time, this pork price is increasing following the ASF outbreaks and remaining sustained even after kind of that initial time of the outbreak, up to about 160% increase. You can see those are just some pictures of some of the prices in the pork markets, where you can see, like in the cities, for example, it can be quite more expensive even than kind of this average price. And this is from similar graph, and this is from a review that was done recently. And, you know, they looked at this too and found that it really is staying quite sustained, which really affects people's ability to access pork, which is, you know, typically a pretty affordable, really nutritious protein. But here is this, ASF has really caused the price to increase and stay increased for a while. And this has been in the news in the Philippines as well. Right, so this is a quote from a SwineWeb article. As domestic pork prices are rebounding, or production is rebounding, prices are expected to still remain elevated due to a mismatch between supply and demand. So the disease itself, not necessarily being a food safety issue, but right, affecting in a food security way. So that's something that they remain concerned about there. And so the next example is looking at mental health and social well-being. So this is a research activity that we conducted through CAFS back in December of 2023. So we developed a questionnaire, and it was based on some of WHO's mental health questionnaires. I think it's called the AQ100. I'd have to relook up exactly the name, but in case somebody else was looking for those resources, you know, happy to try to find those for you. But so we developed a shorter questionnaire based on that to try to help us assess the mental health and social health impacts of responding to the ASF outbreaks to Filipino veterinarians. And so this questionnaire asks them questions about their physical, emotional, and mental states before and after the ASF outbreaks. And we followed that up with a live discussion of those summary results to try to kind of validate them and get a better understanding of some of their responses. And so these were veterinarians that were both public and private veterinarians, but all had been responding to ASF outbreaks. They were part of one of our training programs for ASF and swine, so very much involved in this emergency response. And so I added this in as a bonus slide. So this is actually from another workshop we did with them, but relates to some of the issues that they brought up in their discussion. And this is looking at their burden of work. And so the red is their burden of work before, and the blue is after. And so we asked them to self-report, you know, on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being the highest, what, you know, how has your workload changed after that outbreak? And there was a significant increase in their workload, which I'm sure you could ask a lot of veterinarians the same question following these types of emergency responses and probably get a pretty similar answer. And we know that burden of work is linked to things like burnout and eventually mental health issues potentially. For the questionnaire that we did in December, you know, I just want to kind of give you a short highlight of some of those top responses that they gave. So those signs that they reported included reduced energy, reduced enjoyment of life, new feelings of anger or frustration, reduced sleep, new feelings of hopelessness or sadness, and trouble concentrating. And so these findings are similar to those from the FMD response in the UK in 2001 and in Japan in 2010. And I did link those up in the top right-hand corner in case anybody wants to kind of read more into this specific subfield. But we don't just conduct this work, you know, to document, but we're really hoping that by showing people, this is what you could experience if you went through this type of a emergency response for ASF, that it can help them to prepare themselves. Because typically, like when you read in like psychology and things like that, preparedness for possible reactions can really help people manage them easier. So, we're again trying to present this as important for sort of that holistic management of an ASF or really any FAD emergency response. And I also include here some highlights, some things that stuck with me following the discussion that we had back in December. So they reported that because of the financial hardships, some of the outbreaks might be affecting the ability for farmers to send their children to school. So this was what the veterinarians reported as their experience, working with their farmers. And they reported because of, there's no indemnity for the depopulated farms. So, for them, it's pretty much an economic catastrophe. And so in their country, that was one of the effects that they were seeing. And I do remember one participant saying, following a depopulation event of one of the farms that she worked on, she was legitimately concerned about the risk of suicide for that farmer. And again, so pretty heavy topic, but something that, veterinarians absolutely will see in the field following this type of event. So it's really important that we try to understand it so that we can try to help prepare our veterinarians, right? They don't get this kind of training in school. So whatever we can do to help prepare them to handle these kinds of events will really help protect their mental health, their social health, but also those of the farmers that they work with as well. And I think also as an extra note for this, because I don't think I have a slide on it, we do have this submitted for publication now. So we hope to have this published, and then you can read more about what we did in the future. All right, and now switching gears a little bit, I think I still have a couple of minutes, so that should be perfect. But we have recently started a project. So we got funding through the University of Minnesota Institute on the Environment. So look at the environmental health impacts of ASF. And as far as we know, this is probably the first or one of the first looking at kind of more holistically, what are the effects of this type of a disaster to the environment. And so when I say the environment, I specifically mean, any aspects kind of the natural world. So, what is air, land, climate, water health, soil health, all of those kinds of things. And we know there are potential effects from activities such as mass carcass disposal, right? Like what happens to all of these carcasses that we're burying in the ground falling to population, and large volumes of PPE or threats to endangered wild swine. But all of these have not been formally assessed yet. So through this project, we're hoping to identify some of these areas of concern and some potential mitigation strategies, and then share those lessons so that others can be prepared as well. But this work will be primarily taking place in the Philippines. And so it's just some examples here so far. So for example, the Philippines has warty pig species that are, some of which are critically endangered. So this is, something that hasn't been documented, but we know that ASF has been affecting these species. So again, a potential risk to biodiversity there. And so one of the things that we've done with this project so far, and this slide is a little outdated after our November workshop, but we, back in June 2024, conducted a preliminary workshop with Filipino veterinarians, and we did a stakeholder mapping exercise with them. So we asked them to identify who are sort of the key players in the environmental space. So the government agencies, wildlife agencies, all of those types of things. And also, what are some of the key effects that you see from the ASF response to the environment? So some of the things that they reported were reports of dumping carcasses in water sources. You can see a picture of that on the left-hand side. There's just a swine carcass there, kind of in the middle of the river. They specifically had concerns about water contamination from carcass burial. So they said, we have a really high water table here, and we're not allowed to burn carcasses. So we worry about those decomposing carcasses leaching into our water source. We also performed a literature review as well to try to assess, what has been done as far as assessing environmental impacts of ASF. And there really wasn't anything out there. There was one study that was looking at water quality concerns of coliform contamination following carcass burial in Vietnam, but this remains a pretty unexplored space. And so we just had a workshop in November where we did another series of activities with our veterinarians. So hope to have more of this information out soon in the future. We'll be continuing with this one over the next year to 2 years. So really hope to have more out. All right, and then this is just my last slide. I'm happy to take questions now, but I guess my last message is, we're really hoping to have this more holistic One Health response to ASF. So even though it's not a zoonotic disease, right, it can have impacts to public health, to our environment, and trying to make sure that we're prepared to mitigate all of that and really reduce the impact of these diseases.
Thank you, Rachel. It was very interesting, especially from the perspective of mental health, because this is completely new area we are starting diving into. We used to think that ASF doesn't affect humans, so we are good, but we are not. So my question to you is, you mentioned several challenges mentioned during your work with the vets. How would you address those? Is there, we know that there's always shortage of staff. There is always very high load during outbreak responses. Do you see any potential ways how we can help vets to address these challenges?
Yeah, great question. And I took this slide out because it was very Minnesota based, but there are a lot of resources out there already. I think right now the most feasible thing that we can do that's really not too hard is training. So training people that are in these roles about, here's what might happen, here's how to experience it. I think veterinarians especially do they experience this type of stuff all the time, right? We in our field, we deal with like euthanasia of animals, farm emergencies like barn fires, things like that. So I think we're already dealing with a lot of it. So it's just trying to provide that type of training in a more formalized way. Some specific examples include the American Association of Swine Veterinarians has worked with mental health specialists a couple years back to put together a check-in tool that's basically just a guided sort of decompressing, mechanism following a depopulation event, trying to get people like to either do it by themselves or do it as a group if they're comfortable, but just to recognize like, hey, this was a really stressful event to like depopulate all of these, poultry or swine, and making sure that people get help if they need it. Another tool that I have seen that through some of the courses I've taken, psychological first aid. So that is one that was specifically made for disasters, so not animal health disasters specifically, but just any disaster to try to triage people. So it's as the person practicing it is just trying to triage, like, does this person need to go to like an emergency person right now? Or are they somebody that, we can connect them with like a lower level of care? And there's tons of versions of that training available online, many of which are free. University of Minnesota has one. So I think it's those kinds of things and embedding training into our training programs that we already run. I don't think it needs to be like, 6-month course, but just like one learning module, I think is better than not having it.
Yeah, what about your experience with the Philippines? After you conducted this side project, do you notice any changes or any effort in order to address these challenges?
Yeah, good question. We haven't really like formally interacted with them on this topic, so there could be things going on that I'm not aware of. But I do remember, and I know we're getting close to time, so I'll try to make this short. I do remember them, like I shared those resources with them during our discussion. Like as our discussion got very heavy, I was like, okay, I know some of these things exist, so I'll share them with you. I mean, they were like taking pictures and downloading it and like very enthusiastic about that. I think the difficult thing in the Philippines and a lot of places, and this is like what they said, was you just don't have a lot of resources for this type of care already for the general public. So that part gets difficult. And there's already a lot on their plate, right? Their burden of work is like super high. So that's why I think if, we can help try to embed these things in the trainings like that we provide, for example, I think that helps lessen, the burden of what they need to do to try to stay prepared.
Makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the questions and the invite. I appreciate it.
Could you please share your email just in case someone has question and if it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me just to put it in the chat, or what's the easiest way?
I think it would be the easiest way. Just put your
Okay.
name and your email. Thank you so
Perfect.
much. I appreciate you joining this early morning for us. Have a great day. Thank you.